Welcome to another episode of Culture of Value. I'm your host, Troy Scheer with Binary Automotive Solutions and Binary Marketing Solutions. Today, our guest is Tom Klein. Tom is the lead consultant and founder of Better Vantage Point, which specializes in dealership dispute and compliance. And Tom has been in the automotive industry, actually working as an owner within dealerships for more than 30 years. So there's a lot of experience here on Tom's end of being able to understand what goes on the back end of the dealership side within compliance, but also how to work with employees and customers and making sure that everything there works smoothly. Because what we found is that's one area where a lot of issues can arise within government entities, that unhappy employees, unhappy customers. And there are a lot of things that you can do, and we're going to talk about today on how you handle those things up front so that you don't basically making sure that you don't have those issues in the first place. So Tom, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Troy. Glad to be here.
So again, well, we've kind of talked about this a little bit off camera, but wanted to get into a little bit deeper in terms of what are some of the things that can be issues for dealerships outside of the standard thing of cash reporting, truth in marketing, truth in advertising, some of those things that we have that are compliance related. But now we're digging into things that where we're actually dealing with people. And as we know, everybody can be a little bit different in how they view things. And so you really almost have to be, in a sense, a true leader from the dealership perspective to make sure your employees are happy, make sure they trust you and feel good about what's going on in the dealership, that you have their best interest at heart. But the same thing, obviously your customers, making sure that they're taken care of, especially when issues arise.
Right. So there's dealers have a lot of unintentional problems that they may not know about, and it's important to have somebody come unearth those problems and identify them and try to find a way to mitigate their risks so that those problems don't become bigger problems. There's a expression in the claims business that your first loss is your best loss. And what that means is when you find a problem or you're aware of a problem, fixing it right then and there is usually the least expensive way to get that problem handled and make it go away. If you leave it or you procrastinate or you don't pay attention to it, it's going to get bigger and it's going to change, and it's going to be more difficult and more expensive to resolve later.
Kind of like having a cut or some kind of physical injury. You don't let it fester until it becomes infected, and those types of things. You head it off right away, because like you said, the longer you wait or try to ignore something, if you know you've got a problem there and it's not going to go away, waiting is just going to cost you more, money, time, headaches, and everything else in the long run.
Right. And one of the problems is you don't always know what you don't know. So having an expert, whether it's me or anyone else, come in from an outside, kind of take a 40,000-foot view and see what operations and how you're handling your operations, and then what you can do to plug in some of the holes that you may not be aware of.
And so one of the things that we talked about before with this, and you have an article talking about it, but is trust and building trust in your relationship, especially among your employees. And I think right there is a place that, I don't know necessarily that, all dealers think about this, but disgruntled employees can be a true challenge to you. Not just, okay, I'm unhappy here at the dealership, but once they are, fired, quit, whatever, can really create true problems outside for you from a reputation standpoint, because now they can go post and talk about how horrible you were, or, potentially bring up things that may not necessarily be true. But, as we see now, once an allegation is placed, it's kind of in the court of popular opinion. It becomes a situation there. And, then all of a sudden, as we talked about before, you get government entities involved, which now you've got a whole nother headache. So what are some of the things you can do just within your own team as a dealership principal and being a leader, dealership principal, GM, to make sure that you have a team that knows that you have, or that you trust them, that they trust you, that you really have a true team culture there, that will make things a lot easier in terms of negating some of those issues before they ever become an issue?
Sure. So those are all good questions. So first, I think it's important that you take a look at websites like Glassdoor on a weekly basis. Glassdoor is a website where employees will grade their employers. So keeping in touch with that, I think, is a good first step. When you have disgruntled employees, though, they're going to be less productive, and they're going to spread poison. So I think the first thing you do when you've recognized, or you recognize that you want to start working on these things, is understand which of the four scenarios that you may be in. Number one is you have trust with your staff, and you want to make sure that you maintain it. Number two is you had trust with the employees and you made a mistake, and now you're working on building that back. The third is you don't have trust with your team and you need to climb out of a hole. And the fourth one is you don't have trust and you might not realize you even have a problem. So I think these four are the first way to start. And then you can start taking steps to have a more positive relationship with the employees.
So, and with that, obviously, if you've got trust, no, that's something you can continue to build and make sure that that stays. But what are some of the things that you can be doing as a leader? And I say, sometimes I'll use leader in air quotes, because just because you are at the top of the pyramid doesn't necessarily make you the leader.
Right.
What are some things that people do with, just as human beings, that can create some of those kind of toxic environments that, end up costing the trust that you may have had too? Because sometimes that just, like you said, you make mistakes. What are some of the things that you can do to, or that are out there in those practices that you need to work on or be aware of?
Sure. I think the first thing is employees by definition are subordinate. So they bring you not so great news all the time. So the first thing is be careful how you treat the employee when they're bringing you bad news. Make sure you're not belittling them. Make sure you are encouraging them to bring you the information quickly and efficiently so you can act on it. Treating them like the enemy is really a problem. So I would say that's number one.
Well, and what you said there too, I mean, if you're afraid of coming to your leader, your boss, whatever name you want to put on it, if you're afraid of coming and telling them the truth because they're going to blow up or scream at you or whatever and kind of blame you as, hey, I'm just the messenger. It will take to, in my mind anyway, you get to a point where you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep this, hey guys, let's keep this under wraps, and then that becomes even more of a problem, like you said earlier.
Right. And that kind of leads to the second one, which is you shouldn't discourage the disclosure of bad news. The bad news you need in order to operate the business. And if you have a situation where the employees are avoiding that communication, you're not getting the real information you need to run the business. So I think that's the second thing. Number three is telling partial truths or lying. I think employees are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. And even if you're throwing a red herring in there, I think they're a lot smarter than you may give them credit for. So that's the next one. Failing to listen is also a really big one. If you're interrupting an employee because you're in a hurry, or you're not understanding, or you're not finding out what the facts are of the situation, because you're not asking the right questions, you're going to frustrate the employees. You're not going to get all the information. And then what happens is your decisions are based on a lack of accurate information. So you're not only frustrating the employee, but you're making bad decisions and based on bad information. And that's a bad double whammy. So failing to listen, I think, is a big one.
one of the things too that I've seen over my, been doing 25 plus years and working with different companies and things like that, that I see within companies, and this isn't just auto dealerships, I'm talking just businesses in general, that I see how uh, bosses, leaders treat people differently, in terms of, well, I kind of like this guy, so I'll let him get by with some things that maybe I won't let this lady get by with, or, it's just, or, you've got, son is involved, so son can get by with whatever he wants to do. And that really creates, to me, and I've seen this happen, a very toxic environment too, that ultimately, to me, your employees are your greatest assets and making sure that your customers are taken care of. So creating that toxic culture there, and what I've seen is then you get people who don't care anymore about you, about your company. It's just becomes a job, and it's like they're going to do the least possible to get by through the day. And, so, and when you're working with customers, you can't be doing the least possible. You want to be doing the most. So would you agree too that some of those things can cause real issues within a dealership?
Absolutely. When you're picking on certain employees or showing favoritism, it creates resentment. It creates animosity. Um, it really is a gut punch to a good employee, because they're probably trying their best, and you might not realize you're doing it, but you really have to try to be as balanced and as calm as you can, even though you as the dealer are getting 100 different things happen to you at the same time. Phones ringing, emails are going off, problems. There's somebody in the lobby who's screaming. All kinds of things happen. But when you're dealing with your employees, for the most part, it's important to be consistent in your communication.
Well, you brought up an interesting point there, talking about, having somebody in the lobby screaming and somebody that's unhappy there. In my mind, and tell me if I'm wrong, but making sure that you've got that trust, and that have allowed your team to really, and I will use this word kind of loosely, but love you as a person and love the company and all those kind of things, and that you've done the right things in building that culture and giving the team some ownership. That also helps take off that problem of having that screaming, potential customer in the a lobby, because now you've done the things and set up the processes and the given the ownership to your sales team, or managers, whomever, to really go out and handle that problem without having to bring it all the way up to you as dealer principal, where you're having to now go out and deal with it. So it takes away from your time.
Right.
So do you see that as another advantage of making sure that you're doing all the right things by your employees
I
to
think,
eliminate some of those issues for you?
yeah, I think it's important. I think there are a lot of dealers who want to make every single decision, and they want all the decisions to flow up to them. And I've seen this happen where things stop because work stops, because the employee sends an email to the boss, and because they want to make every decision, and down to the minutia, employee calls, the call doesn't get returned, or they send an email and say, how do you want to handle this? And they don't get an email back. And so the work stops on the employee's desk. They can't move forward with whatever the project is because they're waiting for a decision. And I see that as a real problem, and I see it happen all the time. On the other hand, if you empower your employees and you tell them, here are the parameters with which I want you to handle. If you've got a screaming customer in the lobby, you should have veterans who have been at the dealership for a while who can handle those kinds of things. And you give them the parameters, and you say, hey, within these certain dollar figures or these situations, offer them these three things, or just get it handled, or fix it, or whatever the parameters are. But if you don't, then the workflow begins to slow down. And that's tough in two different ways. Number one, it's tough on the morale for the employee, because they're trying to get their work done. And as the leader or the boss, depending on how you want to look at that,
Right.
As the boss, you're not making those decisions, and so the stuff's just piling up on their desk, and they don't feel like they're being productive, which feels bad, and so they're not feeling like they're getting their work done. And then in those cases, often the boss comes back and says, well, why didn't you finish this project? And then what happens is the employee says, because I'm waiting for you, I sent you an email on such and such a date because you wanted to make the decision. And so the employee is getting frustrated, the work's not getting done. It's just not a great situation. But when you give them parameters and say, each employee should have each manager, I should say, should have their parameters. And then conversely, so should the employees. Even the frontline employees should be empowered with what to do to handle the customers. And that also is a matter of how much authority you want to give them, or if any.
Right.
And that's up to the dealer, how much authority each of the frontline employees should have.
But when you say that there, that's something that should be decided well beforehand. And as an employee, new employees come on, to have that consistent training of knowing, okay, at this level, this is my scope of authority. And as I go up, this is what I can do, so that you're not winging it when something happens. It's, so you're talking about a lot of things too with compliance training and the various things you do there. But I think that as part of the big picture, making sure that you have that plan in place and have real clarity is going to help potentially alleviate a lot of problems down the road versus being vague, where everybody's kind of like, well, I'm not sure what to do. And then again, as it goes back down to the customer, well, the longer it takes to solve a solution provide a solution for a customer, the more frustrated they get.
Right.
And that's where then can lead into those problems of, customer issues and disputes and things like that.
Right. I might be remembering this wrong, but my recollection is that a few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, Starbucks came out and said, if we don't make your drink right, come back, we'll make it right.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did by saying, first of all, they needed to say that. It was many years too late in saying that. But what they were essentially doing was empowering their frontline workers, right? The people who are helping the customers to do the right thing and to do the right thing by the customer. They didn't have to ask anybody. If they made your drink wrong, they just take it back and they'd make a new one. And that was it. There were no questions asked. You'd say, this wasn't the right thing, and here it is. And you felt better about your experience as a result. So I think dealers can adopt that kind of mentality and put some fences around it when it comes to dealing with customers.
Well, I think, and this is something that I've talked about with other guests and things like that, but just in terms of from a dealer principal perspective, is always be thinking like your customer. And so even in this situation here, it's kind of put yourself in as a dealer principal in the position of, okay, I'm the customer and I'm coming in to do what are some of the issues that can arise, so that I'm thinking ahead of time so that I can work with my employees to make sure that those things are handled, and really be thinking about and being proactive. Because if you don't have those things in place and are kind of just blow it off, I mean, irritating a customer is something that, can definitely not only cost you a deal right then and there, but what can it cost you down the road in terms of other, you think, okay, well, I just lost a customer. Okay. I missed a deal here selling this vehicle. Yeah, they might be mad, but so what? And it's not going to be any real issue. But in the long run, that could actually potentially cost you actual hard dollars in other ways. Correct?
Absolutely. That's what happens is customers now feel more empowered than I think they ever have with the internet, with all the review sites that are on there. And I advocate that each of the dealers review 36 sites on a monthly basis and 4 or 5 on a daily basis. For example, the dealer should have somebody look at Google and Facebook and Yelp and Dealer Rater. One of my clients calls these hater sites, but on a daily basis. And these reviews actually can help you run your business, because if you see one of the salesmen keep coming up and getting bad reviews, well, it's time to have some training with that salesman or some corrective action. So I think that's important. But specifically, if you don't have a good process for your online, and I call it reputation mitigation. Some people call it reputation management, but
Mm-hmm.
really what it is making sure that if there's a problem and a customer posts a negative review, that you have a process at the store to handle that. What I advocate and think the best practice is you post a quick response that's not defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Then you figure out who that customer is, and you pick up the phone and you call the customer and say, I see you wrote a bad review. We want you to be satisfied. Don't want you unhappy. Come on in and let's try to fix it. And then you have that person, getting back to the empowerment issue, that person who picks up the phone has to be empowered to fix the problem, because otherwise that person will try to start building trust and rapport with the customer. And then if he or she has to say, gosh, for $50, I have to go talk to my boss, then you've lost it all over again. That person
And
has to,
maybe even made it worse.
and you have made it worse, because then you've doubly irritated the customer. But if you don't fix these customer problems, they'll go to regulators, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Under the Biden administration, the CFPB is hiring more lawyers right now. They sent out a press release 4 weeks ago, roughly, saying that they're ready to hire more lawyers. So with that comes more enforcement action. The Federal Trade Commission, not to be outdone, wants to make sure that its enforcement is rigid and ongoing. And then you've got the attorney generals and the Better Business Bureau, and each of the states have state consumer affairs divisions, and you've got politicians, you've got all these different people. Another thing is, if you live in a Navy town, you've got the Armed Forces Disciplinary Control Board, which can set a dealer actually off limits. They can say, all the sailors cannot go to this dealership because they're bad. And if a dealership is creating problems for the command, I've seen where they'll do that. They
Right.
will actually put a dealership off limits. So these are all things that can happen. And of course, lawsuits. I'm forgetting one of the biggest ones. If you don't have somebody checking your business practices, have a consistent policy, for example, on processing fees. Are you charging everyone a processing fee? These create class action exposure, where two or more customers get together and sue on behalf of a class of dealers, on behalf of a class of customers.
Right.
So the customers, so now all of a sudden you pissed off one customer for $650 or $649 or $699. Now the lawyer is going to be suing on behalf of all of the customers for the past number of years, whatever the statute of limitations is. So if you sell 200 cars a month, then it goes for 2 years, then do the math. That's 2,400 times 2 is 4,800 times whatever the number is, plus triple damages, which are
Mm-hmm.
plus punitive damages, plus attorney's fees. So the numbers build very quickly.
That $700 can turn into, seven figures real quick.
Very quickly, very quickly. And I've seen class actions happen. Back before the internet, class actions started. I know of one example where a class action started in church. Two ladies sitting next to each other in church. And she said, well, did you get screwed by this dealer? I got screwed by this dealer, and off to the races. And it was I forget the settlement, but it was between $5 and $10 million. I mean, it was no joke. So fixing customer problems early, going back to what I said earlier, your first loss is usually your best loss.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's why we, with our dealership clients too, is really promote it's something that we do here for is social listening. And, sometimes they don't realize, dealerships don't realize what all that entails. And like you said, there's not just Google reviews and things like that, but you'd be amazed at how many forums are out there that get people talking and sharing. And, they look at it as, well, I can, respond to the reviews I get, people are coming in, but you really don't necessarily know everything that's out there. And like you said, trying to monitor all of those things at one time is a job, and then understanding how to make sure to respond to those things. And then also utilizing a lot of information where people may be talking positively about you, that you don't know it, and how to take those positive thoughts and educate your staff as well to make sure that they're continuing to do those things. So
Right.
that's one of the, that's as you recommend, that's definitely something we do as well, is to make sure that you've got to be understanding what's going on out there, because uh, unhappy people especially will talk. You definitely have those that are happy and will share and do that, but it's the unhappy folks that seem to have the loudest mouth and want to get out there and share. And like you said, I think one of the big things that people look at too, and I've seen, again, I've been in the auto industry now for about 3 years, so I have a lot of other industry experience prior to, and it's nothing really different, because I've seen in other companies too, where it's like there'll be a bad review and they're like, oh, well, that's a lie. No, don't, just ignore it. Just, or that kind of mentality. And it's like, well, it may very well be untrue, but by not having any type of response to it, then as people start looking, it creates validation for it, because it's like, well, if they're not defending themselves against it, it must be true, to the point that, well, and those kind of things can build. And, one unhappy customer, somebody sees it, leads to another and another. So it's, in my mind, is very important to make sure you have a process in place to handle all of those things.
There's sometimes a paradigm in some dealerships when you get a customer complaint that, and I use in quotes, "We did nothing wrong." I hear that all the time.
And that may well be.
And that may well be, but the situation is, it doesn't matter. You have to fix it. It doesn't matter if you didn't do anything wrong. If you didn't do anything wrong, at least bring the customer back in, sit them down, let them know you're concerned about what they had to say. Maybe you do something small for them. You give them a free oil change in your service department. You give them a gift certificate for lunch out, right? There's always something that you can do. There's always some way that you can try to salvage it. And if it's, even if it's only $20, it's the gesture, and the customer will feel like you heard them and you listened and that you do care. And I think that's important.
Well, and for me, I'm again looking at this from just a strictly a customer point of view. A lot of times, if a company has made a mistake, I look more at how they handle the resolution of that error. And if they are truly, hey man, we screwed up, we're going to take care of you, I'm probably going to be more loyal now to that company,
Absolutely.
that dealership,
Absolutely.
because of the fact that they took ownership. We all, I've said this probably on just about every podcast episode we have, but I screw up. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. It's, do you take ownership of it, and do you work to correct the problem? So I think not only by having that information and those processes in place, are you heading off potential lawsuits, government action and things like that down the road, but you're actually potentially creating a stronger relationship with a customer that can go then, yeah, when somebody asks you about that, hey, where did you get that vehicle from? Well, I had this experience there, had some issues, but God, they really, truly took care of me. I could tell that, they were sincerely and genuinely wanting to make sure that I, as a customer, am taken care of, so that they, can develop a relationship with me. It wasn't just a transaction, situation and, okay, go away now.
Right.
So to me, there's a double plus there in making sure that you're taking care of people properly.
Yeah. I had a call yesterday from a customer. I'm not the dealership owner anymore, but as you mentioned in the beginning, I was an owner for 30 years. And I had a call from a customer yesterday who was having a problem with their car. And I told them how to fix it, because I had fixed their problem many, many years ago, about 20 or 25 years ago, I want to say. And since I fixed the first problem, they had purchased, I'm going to say, upwards of 8 or 9 vehicles from me, personally from me. So just because I fixed their problem when they had a problem, I don't even remember what the first problem was, but it really doesn't matter. They wanted to deal with me, and they felt good about the relationship, and they felt like I would take care of them, of which I did, and still do, even though I'm not there.
Right.
And so I think it's important. I think you sell more cars, to be very specific, when you take care of the customers. It may cost you a little bit in the short run, but if you're in it for the long game, then it's going to pay off.
And that's what you said, kind of like I said, do you want to have, what is the lifetime value of that customer? So when you look at what you may have spent, on the first, fixing the first issue, but you have made, maybe 5, 6, 7x times what you put in there over the long period. And with that customer, like, can also probably has talked about you to, in the dealership to other friends and neighbors and family and all of that. So it really becomes, I always say, making that fix, it almost becomes a marketing expense.
Right. Well,
Not,
dealers,
not necessarily because
dealers track their cost per customer, right?
mm-hmm.
They spend X dollars in terms of their marketing budget. We have to spend
Mm-hmm.
so many dollars of marketing in order to acquire a new customer. And I've seen statistics, and these probably may not be current, but I've seen anywhere from $200 to $500, right? So spending up to $200 to make a customer happy, in my opinion, should be a no-brainer. That should be, if we have to spend that much to acquire a new customer to come in and buy a car, why would we not spend that money on making this customer happy? I mean, what sense does that make?
That's, and that's very true. That's something I was talking to somebody else about the other day, just the fact of how many companies will give, new customers great deals and big breaks, but not the customer that they've had for, 10, 15 years. Like, no, I'm sorry, you got to keep paying the full price. And like you said there, and the last I saw was, it's upwards of $500 now per customer, per new acquisition. So like you said, if I got to spend $300, $400, $500 to keep a customer happy and to spread the word, I mean, that's just, it's an easy decision, I would think.
I would think so. I agree with you.
So what other kinds of things do you see, that again, from that side of things of making sure that customers are taken care of, what other recommendations or ideas can you give to dealership principals and GMs that are watching, sales teams that are, that watch this? Because a lot of times too, some great ideas that we share here can come from the sales team and the guys that are working with the customers directly. Any other thoughts that you have that would be, hey guys, make sure that you're doing these kind of things?
Yeah, I think not all customers have good intentions. There
Right.
are some customers who want to just try to milk the dealer for as much as they can, and will continue to milk the dealer if you allow them. So I think when you fix a problem for a customer, when you identify those types of customers, and you spend X dollars on them, whatever that is, I think you put your agreement in writing and you say to the customer, hey, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to fix this problem. But as a result of that, we're going to sign an agreement that this is all we're going to spend. And that anything else going forward is going to be on you. And you have your lawyer draw up a very small, short paragraph called a release. And you have the customer sign a release and have them sign and say, I understand the dealer is giving me a $500 service credit in the service department, and as a result, I agree to waive any and all claims going forward. So I think on some bad apples, I think that's a good business practice to start with.
That's it. That was kind of my next question that you answered in advance. What happens when you get that customer that isn't really just an unhappy customer because you actually did make a mistake, but the one who's almost an extortionist of trying to come back and go, well, if you don't do this, then I'm going to go out and, say this, and this, or I'm going to contact the attorney general or those kind of things. So that really kind of answers that is make sure if you realize that this is the kind of person you're dealing with, that you document every interaction with them so that way they can't come back and go, basically get out and start a lie, which is really what it is. And then it's kind of becomes, well, no, that's not the way it happened. And it becomes a he said, she said kind of thing. Make sure you document those things so that you don't have trouble down the road with as I like to call them, the extortionist.
Well, it's important in that document there's a lot of important things to put in that document. It's important that it's short. It's important that it details what the agreement is. It's important that it has a confidentiality provision that says that you're not going to go out and blast bad things about us all over the internet. It's important if they wrote a bad review that they agree to update it, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily change it, because customers get upset when you say, I want you to change your review. They'll think the only reason that you help them is to manipulate them in order to get them to change their review. But if you use the word update, then you know that we fixed the problem, because when other customers, right, 80-90% of recent statistics show up to, I think it's 90% of people who are going to buy cars go on these review sites and they actually read the reviews. And
Sure.
customers understand that things happen, but what customers want to see is this happened, the dealer responded, and then the customer updated their review and had their problem fixed. That gives the customer who's shopping for a car more confidence that if a problem does arise, that you're going to fix it. So that goes back to what we were talking about. And if anybody watching wants to get a list of those 36 websites I mentioned, I'm glad to send it to them. If they can just get in contact with me, I'll be happy to forward it to them. But that document should include all those items, plus an item that says that if the dealership has to do something with the lawyers in order to enforce it, that the customer has to pay for the dealer's attorney's fees.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some finesse that's required with getting the customer to sign these kinds of documents. It's not always easy, but the person who is empowered and knows how to handle a customer shouldn't have a problem. If anybody wants a few tips, they can certainly always call me. I'll be glad to talk them through that.
Absolutely. So and that brings up a point. So what happens if you get that customer who is again, just out to, because there are people out there who just want to stir up a problem for people or find an easy way to make a quick buck. What happens when you have that person who doesn't want to sign something like that and continues to cause issues for you?
Well, I think if the person at the dealership who is empowered to deal with them is dealing with them in good faith, then the problem usually won't get resolved in the first or the second meetings. Sometimes if you try to resolve a problem too early with those types of people, they won't emotionally invest in the process. So sometimes you have to do 3 meetings. I've had customers in the past that I've had to do more than 10 meetings, and you have to do it with a positive attitude. You have to listen. You have to be extraordinarily patient in order to get it over the finish line, just like anything else. It's just
So that they don't feel they're being sold or forced into something. That almost, as we all, hey, it was my idea. It's as that dealership, you want to almost make it seem that disgruntled customer is almost coming up with the ideas of how to solve the problem for them, so that when it comes time to make that sign on the line, that they have felt like, well, this was a lot of my idea in here on how to resolve it. So that kind of helps move things along, where they don't feel like they're being, having that agreement shoved down their throat.
Yeah, well, I recently did a webinar and hosted a webinar on how to de-escalate customer problems. And one of the ways I advocate dealing with a customer is, if you give them one solution, Troy, they are going to feel like you are shoving something down their throat. So I advocate always giving them 2 options. And there can be economic disparity in those 2 options. So one of the options might be, we'll fix your car.
Mm-hmm.
Or one of the options, if you don't want them in your service department, and that happens sometimes, we'll pay, you go get an estimate and we'll pay to fix the car at wherever you want to get it done.
Got you.
Or we'll give you dinner out for $200, a night out on the town or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that the repair bill might be $500, but the night out on the town might be $200. And there is a big disparity there. But the customer may really not have a problem with the car. They could have made the whole thing up. You don't know. Maybe they take the $200 instead of the $500, right? And
Right.
so by giving them a choice of what to do, I think you're empowering them to be part of the process. And then they won't feel like something was shoved down their throat. One of the things you can do, of course, is make a car payment for them, or make 2 car payments for them, or say, I'm going to give you, if it's a good customer, I'm going to give you a credit of, $300 in my service department, or I'll make a car payment for you of $510.10. You'll be amazed how often the customer picks actually the lower of the two. But sometimes the customer will say, well, I'll take 100% of option A and 50% of option B, right? And they'll try to work you that way. So you just have to be prepared when you make the offer on how you're going to go. But I certainly believe strongly that you don't give one solution, you give 2.
And do you feel like at that point, when you're dealing with a customer like that needs to be somebody at least at general manager level or above?
It's whomever the dealer feels confident can resolve the issue and bring it to conclusion where it doesn't rear its head again. So I don't think it has to be the dealer or a general manager. I think it can be anybody who's good with people and has good people skills, right, and understands the parameters of what the dealer will spend on fixing a problem and is empowered to do that. I think is fine. I don't think it has to be that high a level at the dealership.
So don't worry about position so much as just solving the problem.
Correct.
Don't let I guess, and there's too where you don't let your ego get involved in terms of, as a dealer principal or GM, that you think, well, I've got to do this because this is my position. Make sure again that in your mind, your only concern is making sure the customer's taken care of. There
is no, as we talked about earlier, the paradigm of we did nothing wrong may be true, and internally. The dealer may say to the person who's fixing the problem, listen, if you determine we didn't do anything wrong, you have the authority to spend up to this much fixing it. Mm-hmm. But it really doesn't, in the customer's mind and in reality, it doesn't matter if the dealership did anything wrong. You still have to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. Customer problems, I say, are like rotten fish. They don't smell better as time goes on. They just get worse, and they really do. I mean, and the more people who jerk the customer around, the worse. I mean, I see one of the mistakes I see online is that when the dealership has some of these services like reputation.com post responses and says, we're sorry you had a problem with the dealership. Please call this phone number, such and such and so and so. And that's all it says. It doesn't even give anybody's name. Right. So the process that you are serving up to the customer is just call in and talk to you.
More frustration.
You're gonna have to figure out who to talk to because we haven't even bothered to tell you who to talk to. Right. And that's what you're doing. So if you're using one of those kinds of services, please make sure that you are actually naming, George Jones, mm-hmm. and George is the person who handles it, and then George Jones should be the one who fixes it instead of George has to go talk to somebody and he has to talk to somebody and, all that kind of
thing. Yeah. Cause really when you think about it, and this is something that I get with any business really, but while you as a dealership are selling vehicles and you're selling service, mechanic work service in your service department, you're really in a sense, just as much as a hotel or anything else, kind of in the hospitality business and then people business. So the more that you can think about the people as you are developing your business practices and processes, the better off you're going to be.
Right. My, you don't know this about me, but my grandfather was in the car business and started in 1925. And my father was in the car business. My brother was in the car business. So I'm a 3rd generation car guy.
It's in the blood, huh?
Right. It's in my DNA. One of the things that my grandfather had advocated is you treat people like they're in your living room at your house. That's how it was. Now, people may say that's old fashioned or you really can't do that anymore because of the internet or there's all kinds of things, but that's where it starts. So their motto was courtesy and fairness. So that was the company's motto back then, courtesy and fairness. So I think that's still prevalent relevant today.
Completely. And I don't think that, the internet or any of those other technological things, that becomes an excuse, because as long as you have that fairness mentality, and that you want to treat people with respect, and all of those things that can still be done. The internet's just another channel of communication.
Right.
So it's how you communicate and what your core kind of mission and values are as a dealership. So
Right.
to me, that's kind of, I would say anybody that says that, that's just an excuse.
Well, I think there's a lot of customers who've got a lot of challenges that as a dealer we may not be as sensitive to, but some of
Mm-hmm.
the secondary customers who have really had a hard time and have terrible credit, either through circumstance or by choice, right? A lot of those secondary customers just choose not to pay their bills.
Right.
Or some have had circumstances where they couldn't pay their bills. So
Right.
I think that it's important still to be sensitive to those customers as well, because I think there is some attitude that's prevalent that they're not as important as customers.
Very true. So we're getting here about 50 minutes into this. So I want to kind of try to tie it up and wrap some things up. But looking at this kind of as a final thing from a financial standpoint, we look at how much does a dealer want to invest in doing all these things? Well, gosh, if we're going to hire somebody to help train and, like to work with someone like you to make sure that all of our compliance issues are in place and taking the time and all that, that's a lot of money and time. Do I really want to invest that on the possibility that some of these things might happen? What would you say to somebody like that if we were looking at this just purely on a dollars and cents kind of thing? Is it smart money invested to do those kind of things that we're talking about, based
Well,
upon what the risk cost could be?
my clients tell me I help them sleep better at night by solving the problems and unearthing the problem. I use the word unearth because I find where the problems are and help make sure there are no chinks in the armor. So
Mm-hmm.
transferring risk and risk mitigation, you have to do it at a dealership. Otherwise, when the problems are $500 or $1,000 or $2,000, that's one thing. When they're 10 and 20 and 50 and 100,000, that's a different thing. You may not know that you're even doing it wrong. I can usually go on a dealership's website and find 4 or 5 advertising violations right away within the first 15 minutes. Those problems, if picked up by the motor vehicle dealer board or a politician who's got a voter in their district who's upset with the dealer and goes to the politician calls the motor vehicle dealer board, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have to spend money on lawyers' fees. So
Ignorance is not a defense, right?
ignorance is no longer a defense. And this is a little bit of like the old Midas Muffler commercial. You can pay me now or you can pay me later.
Right.
That's kind of what this is. And I think it's better to be more proactive. You control the process. You can control the problems to a large extent by policies and procedures you can put in place, by making sure that you're doing the right things, that you're looking at your business with continuous improvement activity and that mentality, and can not only continuously improve on the sales side, but make sure you're doing it on the back end, because all I do is make sure the money that comes in through the front end doesn't walk
Stays
out the
there. Yeah.
back end. That's what I do. That's the area I live in. So I think it's hard, and some of the problems are difficult, but that you just have to start. I mean, some dealerships say, well, how do I start? You start by starting. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll be glad that another thing I'd be happy to give to any dealers who contact me is a compliance management charter, where you sign it with your board of directors and say, we're going to have a compliance program and here's how it's going to look. It's a 3-page Word document, and that entails starting. You've committed to doing it, and off you go, because as you know, in the car business, if it's not in writing, it just didn't happen.
Well, make sure that you send that to me, because when I post this, especially because I share on LinkedIn, so I want to make sure that we can get that out there for anybody that is looking, wants to get in touch with you, that they can get to it easily. I want to make sure it's the information at hand is as easy as possible to have. So
Sure, be glad to.
So I guess, as you look at that, the final question a dealer should ask himself is, what is a good night's sleep worth? you know, so you ask yourself that question and go, well, it's worth a lot. I mean, because that the stress and the things that can come from, just that constant worry and those things will, can eat you alive, not just from a financial standpoint, but a health standpoint. And we know, what is your health, what is your health worth to you? So
Right.
I would say, my recommendation is talk to somebody like Tom, make sure that you're getting that information and understanding so that you can make the best decisions possible. Because the more you ask, the more questions you ask, and the more people you talk to, you can't go wrong. You're not going to get too much information. It's getting the right information and making sure you can make good decisions from it. So, Tom, thank you very much. This was, as every podcast episode has been for me, always I'm taking, nuggets of information that I didn't know about before and using them for myself to become a better leader, and then being able to share it too with our dealership clients and work and provide them more information to help them be better leaders. So I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us, and look forward to, at some point seeing you in person. And, I know there's some conferences and things that are coming back to life over the next, this year and next. So
Right.
hopefully we'll connect out there somewhere in the real, not virtual world.
Very good. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care, Tom.
Bye-bye.